Welcome, everybody, to part 3 of a 3-part webinar series. So today is our last day to have these really rich conversations with Bonnie and Vanessa. Today, the title of our presentation is Difficult Conversations and Big Ideas. How do we begin to have healing conversations with each other? And I would say we've already spent some time answering those questions the last two webinars. I don't know if I introduced myself. I'm Bettina Schultz-Job. I'm co-founder and CEO of Natural Lifemanship. And I think the main thing I would say is if you haven't already been part of the previous 2 webinars, please do visit our YouTube channel. It's Natural Lifemanship, and you can watch them there. But my feeling as I sit in on these conversations is that we are on sacred ground. And I'm so thankful for Bonnie and Vanessa for doing this for us. Bonnie and Vanessa will also be having some of these conversations at our conference. Our conference is October 21st to the 25th, and Bonnie and Vanessa are presenting on the 25th, which is a Sunday. So if you're interested, we would love for you to visit that page and see if there are other things of interest at our conference. So today, just like on the other calls, in a little bit, we will turn off the chat box. These are embodied conversations. We are trying our very best to not be distracted. I turn off my text messaging and all of those things that come through during these calls so that I can enter the space and experience the conversation in my body. And so we are trying to not have too many side conversations. The chat box can be a little bit distracting, but we do want you to be able to ask questions. So at the bottom of your screen, there's a little place that says Q&A. So if you can go there and you can put a question there. So just so you know who is seeing those questions and kind of wading through them, we typically, Bonnie and Vanessa cannot answer all of your questions. I will see them and I'm kind of looking through them. You can see here on the screen now, Tanner, Job, and Laura, who are also with Natural Lifemanship. They're going to be managing lots of tech stuff on the back end if we need anything. In just a second, their video will disappear. Mine will too. The other person I'd like to introduce you to is Bonnie's partner, Josephine. We call her Jo. And Jo is the person that's looking through the questions and then deciding which questions to give to Bonnie and Vanessa. And historically on these calls, there have been lots of amazing questions and just not enough time to get to all of them. All right, so Jo picks. She's your person. So Jo will also disappear here in just a second, but Jo will occasionally pop back up on the screen. She will give Bonnie and Vanessa the questions they can answer, and then she can turn her video off. Thank you, everybody, for being here, and thank you, Bonnie and Vanessa. And you all take it away.
Good morning, Bonnie.
Good morning, Vanessa. Nice to see you.
So good to see you. I thought I would start this morning with a poem, the fire poem. So I just wanted to invite folks to listen to this. This is a poem that I just love. It's something that I was first introduced to this through some work with the Move to End Violence. And it's a poem that just inspires us to think about how we carry our energy through the world. So that's all I'll say about that. And it's called Fire by Judy Brown. What makes a fire burn is the space between the logs, a breathing space. Too much of a good thing, too many logs packed in too tight, can douse the flames almost as surely as a pail of water would. So building fires requires attention to the spaces in between as much as to the wood. When we are able to build open spaces in the same way we have learned to pile on the logs, then we can come to see how it is fuel and absence of fuel together that make fire possible. We only need to lay a log lightly from time to time. A fire grows simply because the space is there with openings in which the flame that knows just how it wants to burn can find its way.
Mhm. Mhm. It's beautiful. I don't think I've heard that before, but it's just beautiful.
Thank you. So how are you? Checking in.
Check
How are things
in.
going?
Oh, well, I think probably like everybody, I'm having bodily responses moment to everything that's going on, you know. Close in feels warm and comfortable pretty much. All our people are safe, and for Joe and I's families, and so that's feels really good and holding, and there's this space between us that feels good and holding, but boy, looking out beyond that, sometimes I'm really anxious, sometimes I kind of go numb, and sometimes it feels like something bigger holds it all. So just kind of all over the place. But in this moment, I really just feel kind of comfortable and happy to be here, and really happy to be here with you.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to the that kind of up and down with how things are feeling. I worked with, I'm part of a huge family, and this week we did a little bit of safety planning around getting our elders to election places and making sure they had a chair in case there's long lines, and water, and getting everybody where they needed to be to take care of themselves in the next couple of weeks. And that was really nurturing in some ways, but really hard in others. So it's just been this time of, yeah, lots of up and down. I think if I don't like one mood, I can wait 5 minutes and I can probably have another one. So that's the truth about being me right now.
That sounds just right.
Yeah, definitely.
Training and uncertainty and abrupt change and all of those things.
Yeah. But I do love that the practice of being with my body as I go through such unique times. These are really unprecedented times for me in my life with all the things that are happening. And so having the practice of being with my body and just kind of noticing how my body is relating to the stress or the need for comfort or the need for nourishment has been a really incredible practice.
Yes. Yeah, me too. They need greater than ever before because of the magnitude of the demand on our nervous system.
Yep.
Even just the noticing sometimes gives our nervous system a little more room to settle, or like you're saying, to know what's needed. Do I need to reach out to Joe or you, or we'll go for a walk, or what would be a gift for this challenged nervous system?
Yeah, and one of the unexpected gifts for me has been trees. I have a big Douglas fir. I live in Vancouver, Washington, and I have a huge Douglas fir in my front yard, and I can be as busy as I want to be, like getting, moving, getting groceries or doing something, going for a walk. And that tree just calls my attention, like just this, it's got this amazing depth in its energy field.
Yeah. Again, I'm just right with you. It's so much fun to resonate about these things. If I raise my eyes and look out here, there's a very enormous tree right across from my desk, and we're up in Port Townsend right now, and it's waving in the wind and the breeze, and it just feels like connecting to the bigger truth in some way of how everything is interconnected and is always giving to each other, and it's just a blessing.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of lessons in nature right now for how we can sustain each other and our communities.
Mm-hmm. And it's something we all share. I mean, something that's beyond race or anything else. It's something we all share and can tap into together. And those places feel good to me too.
Yeah, I totally agree. So do you want to get to some questions and answers?
Yeah, I think we can do that. I wanted to just mention one thing about what we've been experiencing so far before we dive into questions, if that's okay. If that works.
Oh, no, that's perfect.
Okay. So as we've gotten your questions and your comments, for which we've been so grateful, one of the things that we've really appreciated is the growing sensitivity to how white people, without thinking about it, without being aware of it at all, can be so disrespectful to people of color, to Black people and other people of color, whether it's through taking up too much space, whether it's through interrupting and all of that kind of thing. And I think that kind of sensitivity to these broad categories is developing with support of people like Robin DiAngelo or Resmaa Menakem and others that talk about this kind of thing. And as we were feeling into that, one of the things that you and I were talking about is how maybe the next step after that is to begin to move into curiosity about what's happening between the people involved. So to bring it down to so how was that for you, Vanessa? Or how was that for you, Bonnie? Or what was going on there? And so there's like an evolution, I think, to all this noticing. So.
Oh, yeah, I think that's so true. As we read through the questions, and both of us do quite a bit of anti-racism work in our other, in our different fields as well. And it's wonderful that there is such a rising of noticing like how folks are holding space and power, right? And how are we inviting people in, and what practices are good for that, and what habits do we have that push people out or take up too much space, right? So it's wonderful to have that, and I think the questions really reflected that awareness for folks. And I do agree that the next step is kind of thinking relationally, right? Which is, and how is that working for those two people? For you and I, we spend time thinking about what we, like the container we want to create, but not really thinking about it in terms of how much time or space each person's going to get. It's really, what container do we need to embody the conversation that we want to have in a real way? That's kind of what our process has been.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that comes with trust and relationship over time. And so then that takes the dominant space, and also I think makes room that if I do something that feels disrespectful to you, I think you can just share with me about it in the moment, and we'll be with it, and I want to know. Yeah. So it's but it takes developing a relationship that has that foundation of trust and safety, I think, to move to that next step also.
Yeah, and I know that for us, we've known each other a while. We were trying to count it up, and it's definitely over 10 years. We never quite settled on an actual number, but it's also been, we've been in deep community and deep ceremony with each other for most of that. When we are together, we're together in a very deep and engaged way, and so it's allowed our relationship to have a level, for me, of depth that is unusual in my life. So I appreciate it.
Me too. Me too. So questions and answers as best we can now, I think, huh?
Yeah, I think the one that I was really interested in, as we looked over them, was the question around making sure we're tending to the idea that these are just our experiences and our stories. And I think that's a wonderful question. And I definitely want everyone to really realize how important their singular story is, and that no one person speaks for anybody else, and that we've been very attentive to that. But I just wanted to make space to really say it again. And it's not because we don't have commonalities, it's because your individual story is unique and powerful in its own way and deserves to be present, right? Yeah. And so that, I think, is really important to me, for folks to realize I am one Black woman sharing one experience of anti-racism work and embodied practice. And I speak very specifically for me and me alone.
Mm-hmm. Well, I certainly feel exactly the same way. And as I talk with other white people, and if I can open myself to listening, I hear how different stories are. You know, some people have had almost no experience with people of color at all in their lives. Others have been really embedded in communities like that. And there's been culturally, you know, whether you're from the South or the North or whatever, I mean, there's just so many variables, both culturally and personally, and all of that, that over time really coming to appreciate the depth of the difference in our stories. And that's why last time we were encouraging each of us to sit with those experiences in our own bodies and get to know what it has been for us as a unique individual in these settings, because it is really, I had never done it at this depth before, Vanessa, until we engaged in this together. And it's like, oh my goodness, it was such a sad place in some ways, but also a treasure trove of awareness of how I've touched in so many ways that I carry with me. We carry so much with us, you know, what goes on with us.
Absolutely. So yeah, was there anything else we wanted to say about that specific question? I know that it really resonated for both of us, and I think we've actually received that question during each of the webinars, so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, nothing else comes to me right now. How about you?
No, I think that was really what I wanted to say. And also just that our, you know, as a Black woman, just that experiences with racism and the wounds that they create are so individual. I know in the last webinar, I shared the story of my family traveling through from Oregon to Texas and what that really felt like for me. And I was so joyful from all of the other Black people who emailed me saying, oh my gosh, thank you for sharing that story. We had a similar story. So I do know that there's places that our stories have common space. And often it's around where and how we were wounded, not the particulars, but those wounds sometimes are really, they are common. And so I do want to just honor the spaces where we do have a resonance together.
Absolutely, yes.
So do you want to introduce the second one?
Could do that. So there was a question that came that I don't think we talked about at all last time. We weren't sure if we had approached this at all, but it didn't feel done for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Why do Black people get grouped together, but white people don't and won't tolerate being grouped together? And this was an interesting confluence for me, Vanessa, because I hadn't stumbled across actually an Indigenous woman that I know in Canada had told me about this book by Joseph Henrich about weird theory, W-E-I-R-D, Western educated, industrialized, rich and democratic country, and how differently the brain is wired from other more kinship-based societies, like literally almost, you know, probably most of our research has been done neurobiologically on white, well, not always necessarily white, but certainly weird brains, you know, that have been raised in this culture.
Yeah.
And so as a result of that, I started thinking about it because one of the primary pieces of that is that individuality is one of the most prized possessions, or whatever you want to call, the most prized ways of being. And so I think when that's all you've got going for you and the kinship bonds are broken, you cling to your individuality like crazy.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's almost at this point, because we brought this with us from Europe, is wired into our brains that we have to be fiercely protective of our own individuality, often I think at the expense of any kind of awareness of others and of especially of groups and of feeling part of a group and part of a kinship kind of society. So I was really touched by that question. And then I think also when we get scared, we retreat sometimes into our own little fear place with maybe some others, but often alone. And then everything that's frightening us gets grouped together.
Right.
So the degree to which there's fear, I think, is another piece of this. What
Yeah,
about you?
it's a great question because, and it's also a great source of pain, I think, for people of color and people from other marginalized groups in the United States, is this idea that we are not assigned the right to that construct of individuality, right? Like, it's very common for if a person of color does something that is injures the community in some way, the whole community of color will be exposed or held accountable for that and seen as by proxy by, you know, you're responsible as well. And that doesn't happen necessarily for white folks, like, right? And so I think that the question of why is that, I think, is rooted in a lot of ways in the oppression that is present in our culture, which that definitely assigns certain qualities and certain obligations on people of color that aren't assigned to white folks. And so I think that's kind of a way to start to answer it. I don't think we have a whole answer, but I think that you know, I've had the experience. I know exactly what this questioner was getting at. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and one of the things we're going to talk about in difficult conversations is when a white person like me says something like I'm about to say, which is that as a woman who's been overweight since I was 50 years old, I have experienced being lumped in as without willpower, probably not very smart, you know, just like people are surprised if they actually talk to me and hear that, you know, that I actually am involved in some things that matter and all of that kind of thing, because they've already in their minds made up that because I'm overweight, I have all these other characteristics. So so I'm not saying I know what it's like to be a Black person in any way. I just know what it's like to not be seen sometimes because of a characteristic.
Right. And have that marginalization that happens with folks who have been oppressed or are in a group that is oppressed. And I really do think that it is the journey of beloved community, right? That is the absolute core of beloved community, is how are we going to find those common experiences, those universal experiences as humans, and how do we apply that grace and dignity and humanity to all humans, to all beings? That's the task of beloved community. And when some people are seen as individuals and assigned privilege and others are not, there can be no beloved community in that. So it is our journey that we're on, is moving toward that space for all of us to be seen as beloveds and to be seen as kin and to be seen as family.
Yes. Kin and family and each unique individual within that value. Yeah, absolutely. One thing, when we were talking about this earlier, one thing you brought up to me too is that a practice of when we start to feel this grouping together and all of that is to pause and say to ourselves, why am I thinking or feeling that? Where is this connected inside? And I thought that was such a helpful way to think about it.
That's that embodied practice of, you know, challenging those biases or those thoughts or that othering that we can carry, and just say, where's that coming from? Where am I holding it? And, you know, one of the things I love to say is that, you know, we have to open ourselves to welcome the sensations of resistance so that we're not in the habit of resisting those sensations, right? And so it's very much the same thing. It's that opening to that curiosity. Why am I afraid? Or why don't I? Why am I thinking that? And yeah.
Yes, and why did my belly just tighten?
Yeah.
Does it feel like I want to move away? Or
And let the answers be different for each time it rises, and being comfortable if an answer doesn't rise. You know, staying in that space of curiosity.
Yeah, that's what we talk about a lot, is just kind of dropping the question in, but not demanding an answer. because those kind of answers just cut things off. They give you a black and white answer that really doesn't get to the vastness of the experience that's actually arising and the uniqueness of it, like you're saying. So yeah, the waiting, the art of not needing to get an answer immediately.
Yeah, I had a meditation teacher who used to call it learning to sit in the fire, right? The capacity to sit in the thick of it and not demand that be resolved in any way, but to be curious about it.
Yeah.
Present with it, not attached to it, not resistant to it, just present and allowing.
Mm-hmm. Takes a lot of practice.
Yes. I think a lifetime.
I think that's not something you get to and you go, okay, finished with that. Got that one.
It's a lifetime of fun, as most meditators probably would say. I don't know about that. Yeah. So the last question, Bonnie, do we have time, do you think? Do you want to do another question, or are we feeling like we want to move to our interviews?
Well, I think it would be good. I think this is a particularly important one, especially for you to speak to, Vanessa.
Okay, so this is a question about people of color feeling activated in the presence of white fragility, right? That's a really intellectual way of just saying, you know, how hard it is as a person of color to be in spaces with people who are so uncomfortable with these discussions around race and ethnicity and bias and privilege and harm and all, you know, these are really dense, very activating conversations. And for people of color to have to be in those conversations with folks who are also very uncomfortable with them. Like, we've been having these conversations for a long time. Our ancestors prepared us for this, right? We do this, right? This is, we live this, is what I would say instead of do it. We live this experience. And so what, you know, that's a challenge, is how do we deal with, or how do we meet white fragility in the presence of these really important conversations? And, you know, I don't have an answer other than how I have met it, right? This is how I have met these things. And I want to say I'm aware deeply of the pain of it. You know, I have had that injury, and it has been hard to carry. And, but I meet it by really, you know, recognizing that what's being touched inside of me by that fragility or that resistance or whatever is coming toward me, what is touched inside of me is my own, right? That is my rising experience. That is my tender spot that is awakened. And it is awakened in me for my own healing, right? And Bonnie, you've taught me the term touched and awakened, and that has been really helpful for me because I come from a field where we use the word triggered a lot. I'm a domestic violence advocate. I have been for 35 plus years. And so we're really, that was our language for that experience is, oh, I've been triggered, right? And when I learned the idea of touched and awakened, it really opened me up for seeing that experience as an opportunity for my own healing, right? Because something inside of me is touched and awakened. And so for me, the practice has been to breathe through that, to kind of feel that, notice that, and then to make a decision about what I want to do with that, right? Do I want to share with that person who I'm receiving this experience with? Do I trust them enough to say, wow, that was really hard for me. That was really scary. I'm feeling really shaky right now. I'm not feeling comfortable. Or do I just say, wow, to myself, wow, this is really scary. I don't feel safe anymore or comfortable. And I keep it to myself and process it internally. And then again, always find a safe person to talk about that with. I don't mean I do it alone. I reach out to my allies. I reach out to my own community. I reach out to all of my other social justice warriors who are also in this experience with me. And we talk a lot about these experiences, but what I want to emphasize is that it's my own decision and it's my own journey with that experience. And it's not about anybody else.
Mm.
What do you think about it, Bonnie? What would you say about that?
Well, I would say that I don't have that experience. So I really like hearing what you're speaking to about it. You know, I mean, I certainly have moments where who I am or something is being disparaged, and and a client doesn't even know it. Like sometimes I will have people come into my office who really struggle with homophobia and speak about it and all of that. So maybe I have a minuscule experience of it, but I couldn't agree with you more that in that moment, for me, what I want to do, since I'm the therapist, is to focus on their experience and know that I will attend to mine and, you know, be with Joe or some of my trusted beloveds, including you, about what just happened. But that in that moment, if I can recall what the wounds are of this person, and often can kind of orient to the little child inside of them that's wounded, it helps steady me. And also I have a practice of putting my feet on the ground and feeling anchored to the earth, and that tends to steady me so that I can be present with that person right now, knowing that I will attend to what was touched and awakened in me when I can, but soon, you know, not to leave that part of me that's wounded alone with it for very long. So I'm right with you.
Yeah, and I do think it's really, you made a really good point, Bonnie. It is different based on the relationship or the environment you're in, right? If you're in a therapeutic environment, it's going to be really different than if you're you're talking with a coworker, and even more different if it's a family member.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Good. Well, I think those are what we tried to do is synthesize, excuse me, tried to synthesize the questions that have gone unanswered. Yep. And so I hope we've, you know, managed to hit some of the strong points, and then keep asking questions if you want to. And as we move through this more, we'll be sure we make space for that too. So I think, Vanessa, what we want to do now is move into, we talked about what was the best way to approach the question, what needs to happen to make and sustain progress? So that question then of what is it that we need to do? And so we kind of broke it down into some different questions about that. And so we thought we'd interview each other and see how that would go, because it just felt like it might be fun to do it that way. So when I asked that question of you, what needs to happen to make and sustain progress toward equality, what jumps into your mind?
Oh, I'm so glad I thought about this, and we talked about, just kind of really trying to think from my own perspective, like, what do I really feel in my heart is necessary for us to continue this work, this such important work. And the first thing that came to me is vulnerability. Right? Just a willingness to inner vulnerability. I think as Americans, it's hard for us. We want to know. We come from a very hard drive-driven culture. And the idea of vulnerability can be incredibly scary. I think we give lip service to a willingness to be vulnerable, but it's rare that we really put it into practice and are really significantly willing to be vulnerable. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's kind of the first step, is softening our need to know, our need to get it right, our need to always have an answer or the right answer, like just that willingness to be in that vulnerable kind of liminal space of change, because change is this liminal space. It's a space where what you know falls away and what you will know is not yet born. And it is an incredibly tender, rich, and vulnerable place. And if we can't be there, we'll never get to where we're trying to go. Mm-hmm. So I really want to invite us to think about vulnerability in a way that is a practice of being in that space between I've got it all together and I know, because we know some things about this work. And we have to go to a place of liberation and beloved community, and we do not know that yet.
Mhm.
So vulnerability is what's going to get us there, I
Mhm.
think. The other part of that that comes to mind is just vision. And I think vision and hope, like, I don't think we know yet what the world has to look like with a beloved community and a liberated, a liberated society where all people are welcome, all beings are welcome,
Mhm.
and accepted. And so to create a vision for that, I think is part of what we have to do. We have to, kind of resist the urge to look back, and just kind of allow ourselves to have this creative visioning, like, what will it look like when we're all liberated? What will it look like when we don't ever have to train about anti-racism? What will it look like when people are really beloved with one another? That doesn't mean we don't have challenges or conflict or illness or struggle, right? That's human. We're going to have those things. But what will it look like when we meet those things with a different, more liberated framework?
Yes.
Right. So that vision, I think, is so important, and that vision being hopeful and something we can, like, if it doesn't happen in my lifetime, I can give this vision to the next generation. And it's clear enough and sweet enough and enticing enough that they're going to grab it,
Mhm.
right? They're going to want it.
Yes.
So I think that is our task, right? That's the task of our time, is the vision. And then the other one is accountability, right? I think that we have to be accountable in this time to the ways we harm one another. And I don't mean that in a shaming way, but in a way that kind of courageous accountability that says, when I know better, I do better.
Mhm.
I am so sorry for the impact of what I've done. How can I enter that? How can I tend to that, in my own unique way? But that accountability that isn't guilt or shame or punishment, but that is really that vigorous accountability of the warrior, right? That holds themselves to the standard that says, my values matter, and when I violate them, I am accountable to myself for that,
Mhm.
and to my community for that. The other thing I would add is this sense of engagement. We won't do this shut up in our house. I don't, it's COVID right now, but we won't do this by ourselves, right? We're going to do this by engaging in community, and it'll be engagement with people who think very differently than ourselves. And it's going to be engagement across generations, across religions and faiths and spiritual practices. It's going to be ethnic, across ethnicities and cultures and communities. And so that sense of engagement and that invitation to be engaged in the world, and to be fully yourself as you do that, not becoming somebody else, but to really know who you are and engage the world from that place of strength and vigor. If I want to share who I am with you, right? I want to show you the best of myself. And then if I know you a little better, I'll show you where I struggle and where I'm afraid and where I'm wounded, right? It's that level of engagement to just continue to show up in whatever way you can do that. And then I think the last thing that kind of came to me as I was thinking about trust, that is this sense of trustworthiness. I think we hear so much in activist communities about, I don't trust this system, or I don't trust this person, or I don't trust these people. And I think that that's legit, right? Because trust is something that we give depending on where we are at the moment. But I like to think about being a trustworthy person, right? That my activism is not so much about who and what I can trust, but it's how trustworthy am I, and what makes me a trustworthy advocate, or what makes me a trustworthy social justice warrior, or a trustworthy friend, or a trustworthy woman or a wife, right? And so that sense of trustworthiness, I think, takes us a long way, especially in that idea of vulnerability. And for me, trustworthiness is really about integrity. Like, anyone who knows me knows that the person showing up now is the person that showed up 10 years ago. And was probably, like I'm very much who I am. And for me, trustworthiness is being really authentic, and letting folks know I will show you who I am. And if I need to not show you something, I'm going to be really transparent about that too. Like what I need to hold sacred and private, I'm holding sacred and private. And that's part of how I'm trustworthy is trying to limit what's hidden from people. And also just being willing to be wrong. I'm very comfortable not knowing something or not getting it right, and saying I'm sorry. I think trustworthiness holds all of the things that I talked about. So that's a few of the things. I think deep storytelling is another thing I think we need to learn more how to do, right? That sense of deep storytelling. There's a couple elements of storytelling. I don't know if I have time to go into those, but there's ways that when we know our own deep story, we can show up with a lot of integrity and vision and vulnerability in the world. Do you mind if I go over a few of those, Bonnie?
No, not at all. This is wonderful.
Or I think I have them somewhere here. Yeah. So it's kind of this method called courageous storytelling, and deep story is really about knowing yourself so that you can show up in a real and meaningful way in complicated spaces, right? And the first one is there's like 6 sacred stories of deep storytelling, and I learned these from an African storyteller and have applied them in lots of different ways. Yeah, Ascari taught me these. I was just asking Spirit who it was. Ascari taught me these, and I think Ascari has since passed. He was a storyteller in Portland, Oregon, and amazing. If anyone from Portland has in the storytelling and shamanic communities, you will remember Ascari. But the 6 sacred stories are: who am I? Just who am I? Who are my people? Where did I come from? Who am I as a person, right? First you answer that. And then the second one is, why am I here in this moment, in this time, in this place? Why am I here? What is my vision? What do I notice? What do I see? What is the relevance of what I'm noticing and seeing, right? Why am I seeing the thing that I see? And what are my values that I'm acting out in the world every day? You know your values by your actions, right? We have values that we have in our head, and then we have the values that are in our hands, and they're being acted out in the world. So that's, Ascari would say, I know who you are by what you're doing, right? What are the teaching stories that I carry? Like I'm sharing Ascari with you right now. That's part of the teaching story that I'm carrying right now. And then lastly, what is sacred to my community? What is sacred to me and the people that I come from and the people I hold dear? If we lose our sacredness, we can't do the meaningful work. We can't build a beloved community without sacredness. And knowing what is sacred to our community as Americans, our community of people living through this pandemic at this specific time, we are a community, and what is sacred to us, each and every one of us, is part of the question we want to carry. And then also, what must I give forth to the next generation, right? What do I give to my descendants, because I am ancestor and I am descendant. And so those are the 6 stories that you can carry.
Beautiful. Would you be willing to send those to Bettina so that she might send them out with the link?
I will. I'll be happy to.
that would be just lovely, I think, for everyone to have those to reflect on. It's really beautiful. I just resonate with everything that you're saying, but what I also notice is, and this is something again in this reading about this weird way we live here, is that as soon as you said, who am I, your next thought was, who is my community? For most white people, that is not the answer to who am I. It's something that's very individual and it's isolating. So I think, so I really resonate with all that you're saying, because somehow we as white people have to be able to find our way back into true sense of kinship and community. And I think that that is an essential piece of this work. And I will, later on, I'm going to talk about a way to begin that when we get more toward the end. But I really am so touched by everything you said was about kinship and community, everything, how it's all relational, all relational. So I guess the only thing I would add to that, that as a white woman, I know that my best friend is humility. This comes from getting old and really sensing the depth of flawedness that we all carry, just we just are. I mean, and I don't mean flaw as a bad thing. I just mean we don't have perfect anything about us. And so when we can carry that humility of our inability to do things in the way, again, that this more weird way is like, you got to get it just right. What you were saying, you got to finish it off and understand it and box it in. When we can have the humility to know that that's an impossibility, it gets a lot easier to listen deeply, I think, as you were speaking to. And then my lifelong interest, I think, and what my work wound up being is I'm very interested in the roots of inside us. What are the patterns inside of us, in each of us? And then you get enough people doing that, and the culture as a whole will look like that. And I'm really interested in what the inner shifts that need to accompany the outer systemic changes for it to be able to continue on. So those are the things I've been thinking about, and in addition to all that you're speaking to, Vanessa.
Yeah, I love that about the inner shifts. Like, just, I think there's a way that one of my teachers always says we're creator beings, right? That as humans, we're creator beings. And there's a way that whatever is inside, we start to see it outside eventually. And so I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we do. And if a lot of people are doing it at the same time, it does become culture. And then it just feels like it's ironed in and unchangeable, at the larger systemic level. But if there was a lot of change happening in many individuals, that will shift culture. Wow. It's not set in stone. So I, with you, hope, hope. And looking down the long path. And I think that John Lewis spoke to that, I think, so often about, I'm doing this and I know that this isn't just going to be a quick thing. This is going to take a very, very generationally long time. And I'm good with donating my piece to that.
Yes.
That's definitely a paraphrase.
That is our inheritance from him. Good trouble.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Well, Bonnie, I'm going to give you the next question so you can go first. So what makes these conversations difficult? What makes talking about race so difficult?
Yeah. Well, I think that we are developing so much tenderness in this area. Right? I'm speaking now as this individual white woman.
Yes, of course, yes.
What would make conversations difficult is, for me, a fear that I'm going to do something wrong and hurt somebody. So it makes it hard to approach these things in a way where I follow my impulse, because I've learned to question my impulse. So I don't know that it's a bad thing that it feels like that, but it is what makes it difficult, because some things, ways I've been, ways that I think about, look about, feel in my body about, may be so biased by everything that I've lived through that they're no longer going to be the most helpful way to be, or even the kindest way to be, or even like the most awake way to be, like the noticing way to be. So I find myself being hesitant sometimes, not with you because I have so much trust with you, but out there in the world with other people that I don't yet know or don't know very well. I can feel my belly tighten a little bit as though like I'm waiting to see like what might be okay. And then sometimes 2 or 3 answers will come up in my mind, like I could do this, or I could do that, or I could do that. And I'm totally unsure. So I think that is what could hold me back personally from engaging, because it isn't a willingness of heart. I don't feel like I lack a willingness of heart to engage in conversation. It's the how to do that. And also how to talk about my own experience in a way that doesn't use what you said earlier, I thought was really important about when we notice things that we're doing that are hurtful. When I, as a white woman, notice that, if I go into shame, I'm stopped in my tracks. And so I think it's difficult to do things, know I'm going to be wrong, and then not go into shame. I mean, that's a whole lot of inner maneuvering to have to do inside oneself, especially if we have a history of criticism and shame in our background. It's so hard not to fall into that when we have done something wrong, and then we could get defensive or shrink away or just, curl up in a ball, which is what shame makes us feel like doing. And so I think it's a really delicate place, is because of all of these reasons, is why, in my sense of what makes approaching these conversations challenging, and yet I feel such eagerness for it too. So it's so much shifting around inside. What you were talking about, the liminal space where you're a bit in a blender, like, how do I do this moment to moment? I can think about it pretty easily when it's not happening, but then in the moment of engagement, there are all of these things that come up that can make it hard to find the courage to just, jump. So jump. What about you? What do you think makes these conversations so difficult?
I think right now there's a weariness for me that makes it hard. I come from civil rights activists, right? Both my parents have passed. My aunties, my uncles, my elders, many of them are on the other side now. And so this has been a long journey for us as formerly enslaved people. And so there is this idea that what makes it hard is just a weariness that you carry. This is painful. And so I think that's right now the answer that rose, is that sense of, I really want to keep doing that work. It's important work, but, it's heavy, right? And it makes it hard. Like, that's the first place it's hard. I also it really resonates, that idea of doing the wrong thing. Part of what is hard is kind of, and you spoke a little bit to the white fragility piece. And, I'm a healer and a shaman and an advocate, right? So my whole career has been to nourish people. And so the idea that something can cause harm is very troubling for me. And so I think that I carry some of that as well, just I want to bring all of us together toward a better vision for the future. And I think sometimes that can feel like, from activist spaces, it can feel like I'm not moving people fast enough, or calling people out enough. And in other spaces, it might be, why are we even talking about race when we should be talking about healing? Mm-hmm. So sometimes I feel like I'm between two worlds, which of course I'm pretty comfortable between two worlds, kind of my thing. But when you live in between two worlds like that, you are worried that you might cause harm in one space or another. So that resonates, just being, this is I carry the burdens of my ancestors, and this has been a long conversation for them. So there is some weariness there. And then how do I best do this work because I'm called to it? So, and do it where I cause no harm, because that's who I am in my soul, is a healer. So there, that's what makes it hard. But I do want to speak a little bit to what I think makes it hard universally, like in these times, what makes it hard is we don't have a common language for how to have this conversation. And I really feel like, with a lack of common language, it is hard to talk to one another. And so I do feel like that we want to begin to build some sort of way that we talk about this. How do we talk about race in this country universally? How do we join the conversation, and what does that space look like? And so I think that it's also hard because we don't know how to talk to each other about this. We don't have the words, we don't have the practice. We don't know how to do it. And we are the ones who will build that for the next generation. So it is our task to come up with, how do we do this? And I think that part of it is what we're doing now, but I really invite everyone listening to think about, how do you contribute to this conversation about how we talk about race? Because it isn't going to be easy. So we're going to build a container that allows people to have the language to make it a little easier for them.
Yeah, I think I hadn't really thought a lot about that aspect of it. I mean, I think we're going to address that in the next question too, about what are some of the components of how this conversation needs to begin and needs to unfold, and all of that. And with the amount of, I guess one of the things that came to me when you were saying that, Vanessa, is so many people are in such different places about this right now, internally about it, feeling defensive or feeling angry, and all of those make sense to me. I mean, all of those human responses that we have make a lot of sense to me. And at the same time, I think it's essential, what you're saying, is that we begin to find models and be able to begin to do that, and draw more and more people in that feel like it gives them something, like there is hope and there is a sense of relaxation. When we feel that coming together in a commonality like that, literally our nervous system drops, and it's such a good feeling in the body, that settling. So I think that, I think people can be seduced into it by having some of those experiences of settling and finding them so relieving, So I love that idea. Yeah. So is that it for that? What makes it so difficult?
Yeah, that's what's coming, to me, I think. Yeah, I'm trying to think, is there anything? Yeah, I think that's good. Feel settled.
Good, me too. So then I get to ask you the question first this time. So what conversations do we need to be having? What is your sense of the conversations that would be most helpful to actually have at this point?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, I think, this goes back to kind of community and relationship for me. But the questions that matter to me are, how have I harmed you? How do I help you heal? What has happened to you and your people? What are you afraid of? What excites you? Where are you strong? I think we have to have conversations that really meet people in real spaces. There's a danger, I think, in rhetoric and the way it takes us off course, because this is a human experience. It is felt. We are in pain. We are suffering. We are afraid, right? That's a human condition. And I think that the conversations we have to have are around that, right? Why are you crying? Why are you afraid? Why do I scare you? You know, how can I comfort you? Am I the wrong person to comfort you? Can I help in another way? Right? There's just this way that we want to have the conversations that we most want to have with one another, right?
Yeah.
That makes sense to me. But I think also what's coming is also this, how do I restore what has been broken? Like this, we inherited this, right? We didn't create the systemic oppression and racism that we are living in. We inherited this, right? So our task is to restore normalcy, to restore wholeness, to restore health. And so I do think there's a way we start to have conversations about restoration, you know, about justice. What does justice really look like? You know, can we be creative about that? Can we really look at how do we restore and create a just world? And these feel like big questions, but in reality, they're really, how have I wounded you and how can I help? Why are you afraid? You know, how can I nourish? Right? When, you know, we can talk about it in terms of justice, or we can talk about it in terms of human connection and engagement, but it's the same conversation, right? How do I meet you, nourish you, support you? And is there anything I need to repair? Right? Is there anything I need to do in order for justice to be present in this situation for you? And I think those conversations can happen across communities as well as individuals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so too. I read an article, I think in the New York Times, about a young man who had experienced restorative justice at his school. It was really a lovely experience that they'd had, because if racist things had happened in the past, they had simply expelled the person who was doing that. And somehow someone in the administration thought, maybe this isn't the best way to do this. And so they actually had an experience of conversation, both between the two people that were involved, the Black young man, I believe he was Black, and the white young man that had made some comments that were really painful. And he was his friend even. I mean, it was not that these two were at odds, these were friends. And so this process was undertaken where they got to do this, and it was done in community, and then it was also done individually, so that there was the opportunity for the whole community to experience it together, but also for the intimacy of the two of them with the support of someone who was kind of holding the space for them. And it moved me to tears. It's like, oh, this is a different way. And so it's exactly that, where the relational and justice are all one experience. And and not only that, but where there's the possibility, when there's punishment, it just makes more problem. When the punishment is the only thing that happens, nothing has been resolved inside either person. Nothing has been given space to change. Yeah. So I'm very interested in that.
Yeah, one thing that I've often talked about is the difference between punishment and accountability is relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We punish people we don't have a connection to. We hold people accountable that we care about.
Yes.
And that's the difference.
Yeah, and I think that's built on a foundation of safety, again, feeling safe. And so I'm always so interested in helping people have conversations about how safe they feel right now, where they can begin to explore in their bodies whether they do feel safe. Because I think, you pointed to vulnerability as being like the foundation for all this to move forward. And we can't be really deeply vulnerable unless we feel safe. So sometimes I think backing up as far as what conversations to have is to begin maybe by just talking about safety. Do you feel safe right now? How do you know in your body that you feel safe? And if you don't feel safe, there's a reason for it that's valid within your own system. You can't force yourself to be safe. In fact, any force makes you unsafe. So there's a way, if we can explore these areas of not safe together, that something might happen. And so those of you that may not have seen Bettina's blog about the chickens that they brought home, I think from the same flock, some white chickens and some black chickens. And out, and they separated, they self-segregated into the white group and the black group, and they stayed separate from each other for a period of time. And what Bettina and her gang were doing was noticing when, I think she says they do the squatty thing when they're scared, and not reinforcing that, but helping them feel safer and safer. And lo and behold, over time, because they've been sleeping separately in the coop, they began to mix. They began to just be one flock again and not separate. And I was so touched by that. I mean, if chickens can do it, perhaps we might also be able to do it, to find enough safety by becoming listeners and learners with each other, and acknowledging, especially those times when we're not safe, when we're not feeling safe in this moment.
Oh yeah, Bonnie, it's so relevant to talk about the conversation around safety, because so much of the protests that's really about, who feels safe and what does safety even look like in specific communities. So I think you're right that safety is a very urgent part of this conversation. Is what is safety? What does it look like to your community? And how will we all know when everyone is feeling that every community, every individual, every culture has that sense of safety? Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, which means tending to our wounds, tending to the traumas that keep us kind of perpetually not safe in our bodies.
Yeah.
And that kind of thing. And so I think that all of that, when there's been prolonged not safety, we develop that kind of perceptual lens where everything is touched by all the old unsafeness, as well as the current unsafeness that's happening right now. And then to begin to help people be able to feel like they can go into those wounds and begin to tend to them, so we're not carrying so much burden of past. And I mean, just in knowing you, the burden that Black people, each in their own unique way, carry just from walking around here and being born into a Black body on this planet. But I do think the white people can also perhaps hold a space with that, because some of us have come into really unsafety also, say in our families or whatever. Mm-hmm. There isn't an absolute divide between the unsafety that you have experienced as a Black person and feelings of unsafety that we've had, and that without in any way diminishing your experience and the uniqueness of it, that we can't kind of come together and hold each other, because we do have some common experiences.
Yeah, I totally hear you. You're saying that while our experiences are different and the pressure of those are very individual or collective in a lot of ways. For African Americans, we do have a collective wound around genocide and enslavement, but there's also that place we can meet commonly as humans of being unsafe. We all know what that feels like, right? Yeah. We all know what it feels like to be unsafe.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. I have another question for you. Do you want to have Jo come in yet, or?
I was going to say, Jo, can we check in with you and see if you have anything for us at this point? There she is.
Yeah, I am. Actually, it's been very quiet. I think you're just ensorceling people. There's been a couple of comments, but really no questions. One person asking about Vanessa, whether there's she's expressing appreciation for basically the donation of these conversations to the broader community, and wondering if there's a place where a donation might be sent in support of anti-racism. So that might be something
wonderful
to mention or to send out at the end or something.
I will definitely think about that and try to pull that together. The first thing that comes to mind is our coalition, but where I'm the executive director, but I will pull together some others as well.
Okay. But there really hasn't been any questions, so keep it up.
Thanks, Jo.
All questions are welcome too. They're there.
You're welcome. So Bonnie, I have the question for you. How has your trauma history affected the way you experience race and healing?
Yeah, it's such a powerful question, and I feel like wanting to extend that to everybody in our group as a reflection on how that is. And I know that I spoke to it actually a minute ago. I got kind of ahead of ourselves here, but knowing that there is a way that my own early, very extensive childhood trauma has affected me in general, but also extends, I know, into relationships with people who are different than me, who I don't know. In that I am now at 77 with who knows how many years of therapy under my belt. It's less true now than it was, but there was a time when I was so frightened all the time inside myself because I hadn't had any help with my own traumas, that I was literally afraid of everybody and more afraid of people who were different than me. And I feel like I very much must have reflected that, just because, we reflect our inner state of fear through so many ways: the quality of our voice, the tension around our eyes, our breathing. All of these things are picked up by each other. And I'm so sure that I must have in many, many times provided injury for other people, and particularly people of color, or I don't know, probably others too, but that's kind of what we're focusing on now, where my fear of them was resonating in them as a way that we weren't safe together, and that maybe there was something wrong with them in ways. And again, a lot of it is below conscious awareness. We use the word neuroception, the way our nervous systems interact with each other. But I don't think anybody, and particularly people different than me, could have felt for decades that they could land safely with me, because I was scared all the time. And it had nothing to do with them. It had zero to do with them. It had to do with my own experience of pretty dramatic unsafety. So when as I have dealt with this over decades now, I feel like I can provide much more of a safe landing place for anybody. Now, that doesn't mean I still don't have implicit bias, and times probably when I tense up if something is going on, or something, if I see somebody that scares me, that might be a person of color or whatever. But in general, it is possible, it has been possible for me to cultivate more of a place of safety inside my own self from healing these wounds. And with that has come the positive gift, I think, of the traumas, which is because I have experienced a lot of pain, and I have experienced, when Vanessa, when you were describing how the slaves were bound and in such close quarters and couldn't move at all, I have a memory of that in my childhood. Not because I was on a slave ship, but because I was occasionally was put away like that. And I felt such an arising in my body of care and concern and depth of connection in that moment. And again, without taking away, I didn't come across a ship for who knows how long and have people dying around me and all of that. I didn't have any of that. But I know what to have a body and to be in the dark and to have no idea when you're going to get out. And so it brought me close to you in that moment. And I think when we have those moments and we can share them, that mutual compassion can be the glue that holds us together as we move forward. So, because so often the struggle against racial injustice flares up and then it dies down again. And some things change and other things then get lost, and some things get pushed way back to where they were before. And so what is the glue that can hold us together so we keep moving forward? And I do think that commonalities of experience, of whatever those might be for each individual, are something that really helps us be able to sustain and move forward together when we feel this bond that happens around that. So that both sides of it, I think, for me. How about you?
Yeah, and Bonnie, I hope you can hear me okay. For a minute there, I couldn't hear you very well. I hope you can hear me okay.
Hmm.
Awesome. You know, for me, it's very similar, actually. It's, you know, the fear, I think, has been the biggest. You know, I have a trauma history. You know, I'm a survivor of childhood sexual trauma. And, you know, that has put lots of, you know, fear in my body, right? There's a lot of just anxiety and anxiousness, I think, that is part of being a survivor of childhood sexual trauma. And then add to that being a survivor of racial trauma, which you know, as a Black person in this world, you are, particularly in this country. And so I think that just learning to navigate fear in a healthy way has been a very committed practice of mine. And so that is, I think, the biggest impact is that my relationship with fear and challenge is very intimate. And I have learned to navigate that, and I have deep practices for navigating that. And I think that's impacted my work. And I think it's impacted it in good ways. Like, I think it allows me to go into very, you know, I'm not afraid of the dark, right, at all, right? To me, you know, one of my favorite stories is, healing stories, is that, you know, the ocean is so deep that at the very bottom of the ocean, there's parts of the ocean that no human has ever explored. And there's also parts of the ocean where the animals have adapted to the pressure that they are under. And they might look really strange. You know, they might have no eyes on the top of their head, or mouths on their tummies, from, you know, so they could eat on the bottom of the ocean. And so they may look really odd to other people, but they have adapted. And because they have adapted, they are still here, right? They are present in their world. And so it's, to me, that, you know, there is that strength because I have adapted to the stressors of being a Black woman in America. And so that trauma is there, but it also makes me uniquely beautiful and capable of what I do. So I think that's part of it, but I also think that there is something I want to mention about self-care, and how I think trauma history can make you not really great at self-care. And I'll speak just personally for myself as an activist and advocate, that just, I didn't learn how to take time out, how to, you know, drink water when you're thirsty, how to, you know, stretch when your body's tired, or take a break and go get some sun on your face. You know, I'm a pout, you know, I just kind of get in there and keep going. And that is just, that's the struggle. Like, I'm real, y'all. That's the challenge, is just learning to take good care of myself and to listen to my body's cues to do that. You know, sometimes I can just get so committed that I don't even listen to my body saying, slow down, take a break. And I think that's part of my trauma history. It's probably part of my personality as well, because you know, I'm me. What else to say?
Yes, I'm right with you. I keep a cup now very close to me because I don't usually notice I'm thirsty till I get a headache.
You realize, yeah.
And that's part of my trauma history too. You know, it's another place where there's definitely a similarity. And of course, you and I both know the best self-care is other care, like you were talking about earlier. Have places to speak to this where you feel quite confident that you'll be listened to, that you'll be heard.
Yeah, and just being in the practice of it. Like, I think the question is such a good one for you. You said that when we started, is that it's a question for all of those listening too, is how has your trauma history impacted your relationship with this work? And, you know, I think it is a both and answer probably for lots of people. Like, there's ways it impedes the work, and then there's ways it makes you more capable of doing the work than anyone else would be. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Is there anything else you want to say about this before we ask Joe? I did see it looks like maybe there's a couple of questions there now.
Um, no, I think the thing that we also wanted to make sure to say here was just that realization that we're all in this together, because we all have, trauma is a pretty common human experience. Suffering is a very common human experience. And so, this is something that we're not alone in this. We're not isolated in this. We are not partisan in this. This is really a universal struggle that we're all in together. And that was something we had wanted to mention.
And some very intimate ways because of our neurobiology too, because we internalize one another. So even though I may on the outside feel like I have to defend myself against you for some reason, for whatever reason, I'm taking in your state. So we carry each other inside, we do that. And we do that so we can heal what's happened on the outside, on the inside, if we can't heal it on the outside. But I just think when we begin to realize that we do feel so much how we are in this together, and that there is a way that, especially in our closeness, that I can, if I tune into my inner Vanessa, I can feel some of what your experience has been, just like you can feel some of what my experience has been. It's an amazing intimacy. Einstein said we have an optical delusion of separateness.
Oh, I love that. So true. So true.
Yeah, look like you're over there, but really you're also in here.
Yeah, which is such a good thing, because there have been times I pull up my inner Bonnie.
Yes. Yes, me too, my dear. Such lovely to have that. So should we ask Joe if there's something
Yes, that'd be great.
come into the room before we dive into the next part?
Well, there are a couple of questions, and I'm going to put two of them together. One person asked about what you think about thinking in terms of brave spaces rather than safe spaces. And I think in relationship with that, there's a question to Vanessa about how does one create a practice of facing fear?
That's awesome. That's great. And so Bonnie, do you want to talk about brave spaces first versus safe spaces? Or do you...
I'm just smiling. It sounds wonderful. Would you go ahead?
Yeah, I'm going to speak to my practice of facing fear, and it's something that I really have cultivated over time. And the first thing I think that I had to do to face fear was to really externalize it, like to really begin to start to realize and recognize without shame or, resistance what scares me, and it's an intimate practice that I have with myself, but also with my greater community. It's something, Bonnie, you and I have talked about fear in different groups and study groups, but I think what I want to say to the person asking is to have that opportunity to really begin to explore with curiosity what scares you and what you're afraid of. And not like in a way that is like, oh, I'm afraid of the dark or I'm afraid of the light. It's like, what am I afraid of that is in the dark? What does darkness even mean to me? What might be in the dark that I am afraid of? So we want to move beyond the quick answers to kind of what I call it is turn over the rock and see what's underneath, right? You want to really get a sense of what is in there. And then the practice is really welcoming those fears. For me, it's about welcoming them, not resisting them, and understanding that my fear, while associated with my trauma, became a source of great pain and suffering. My fear as I heal becomes an ally and a teacher. And so it's no longer something I'm ashamed of or afraid of. Now it is my teacher and my ally, and we walk together. And so sometimes that shift in relationship with my fear is the practice. And I don't do it all the time. I mean, there are times that fear is definitely taking over. and taking me to really scary places of suffering. But I'm also willing to check in and say, okay, what about, I welcome that new experience with fear, and I want to get curious about why was that there. And right now, I have to say, I have had so much fear in my body with everything that's been going on. Like fear is like way up here for me right now. I can get it. And I have just been in the practice of saying, well, what am I afraid of? Right? What do I think will happen? And then really meeting that. And sometimes I take action, like safety planning with my family. It hasn't eliminated the fears that I have for my elders who are in Texas. That fear is really present for me, but I'm not resisting it. I'm in relationship to it, and I'm moving through it, and I'm practicing my welcoming of that fear and learning, like, why is it here? What is it asking of me? You know, it's asking me to reach out to my elders and help them be safer, right? Right. So that's some of the practice. Yeah.
And
I could talk about the practice of navigating fear in a shamanic way for like an hour, so I won't do that.
I wish we had time. But we're going to be talking a little bit more about this later. But I really like, I mean, I'm so touched by what you're saying. And I think that the practice of radical inclusiveness of all the parts of ourselves is the core human and spiritual practice that maybe we're called to. And again, we'll talk some more about that in a little bit. But I love the idea of brave spaces, just that word. I can feel safe space feels relaxing to me. Brave space feels relaxing, but strengthening in my body. I can feel a difference in my body when I say those two things. So I really love that idea of brave spaces, you know? Yeah. Really addresses what we were talking about earlier in terms of being scared we'll do something wrong, to take the step to do it anyway and see what happens next.
Yeah, and the key element in creating brave space is really noticing the difference between I am not safe or I am uncomfortable, right? And so we want to create a willingness to be uncomfortable while not creating a willingness to be unsafe, and learning to navigate the differences between those two things, right? There are times that we will mistake a lack of comfort for a lack of safety when we're perfectly safe. And sometimes, and vice versa. So brave spaces are often uncomfortable spaces that are also safe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. Important distinction. Something else, Joe?
So there's a couple of questions that are asking about how might one go about finding someone with whom to have this kind of conversation? How do you begin to understand or anticipate or infer that a relationship is one where you could bring up some of these hard questions?
That's great. You want to take that one first, Bonnie?
I don't know that I have an answer that has has much of a frame around it. To me, it's I get an intuitive sense that there is an opening, and then I take a step in. I don't know how any other way to say it. It's much more from the heart and a little bit from the belly than it is from my head. Like, I don't know how to say how to do it, but just, you know, you meet somebody and there's something that happens inside that is probably a bit of safety, because the heart is connected, the heart feeling of comfort is connected literally to the circuitry of safety in the body. So I think when there's that little opening, even though you'd hardly even know this person, that there's, for me, a willingness to take a step and see, and then take another step and see. So that's a very unformed little answer right there.
No, that's great. I was thinking, what first popped into my mind about that was the idea of rupture and repair. That idea that that I learned from you, Bonnie, but it's the idea that we're just not going to get it right all the time, and my willingness to repair those relational ruptures is how we begin to cultivate the spaces for these conversations, right? And so that, given, I think that what you're saying is just totally accurate. It's a felt thing. But I think it's also just the practice of knowing that we're going to rupture relationship along the way while we have these conversations, and just being willing to really have the bravery to know that you will hold yourself accountable and repair and seek to repair any ruptures of relationship that go along the way. And trust yourself. I think if you are feeling like you're ready to have these conversations, the people to have them with you will show up, right? And so just trusting yourself and starting small, starting with really small steps, asking friends and family, how are you experiencing all the racial tension in our country right now?
Mm-hmm.
Right? How are you doing that? There's a lot of tools, and I will make sure that folks have the coalition website for resources. There's a lot of tools on there around building allyship, having hard conversations around race. It's the work that we do around our racial justice work. So there's a lot of resources that are really practical that can help you have those conversations. But I would say start with the people that you're already close to, and start having those conversations in a meaningful yet small way with them.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense as well. Yeah. Joe, is there more?
Well, just one person made a comment that I think fits in with your answers, where he says, how do you like the sound of calling someone in instead of calling someone out?
I like it a lot.
Again, it feels very different in my body, those two phrases.
Right. And someone, again, iterating the desire to have a sense of where to send a possible donation. So sending out that website, Vanessa, would be really helpful.
I will make sure to get it out there. It's just the Oregon Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence.
Okay. Want to say that again in case they didn't catch it?
Oregon?
We'll send it. We'll make sure that it goes.
Okay.
I didn't mean to interrupt you. It's just that
I know, and I know that there's a little bit more that you want to cover. Somebody was also mentioning, Bonnie, that they like your catchphrases and little, the phrases that capture some of the ideas in an easy epithet, and wanting to know if there's a way to summarize some of those. I know anybody can go back and re-listen to these things so they can catch some of those phrases that way, but and I'm not sure exactly which phrases this person was referencing, but.
Well, because we have the luxury of conversation here rather than something planned, I don't know what they are either.
Right. So maybe it would be from re-listening that they would be able to pick up on those.
Yeah, and also you're certainly welcome to communicate anything you want to me as well, and make sure that you've got our website, Nurturing the Heart. It's nurturingtheheart.org. So if you want to just write to me too, we could do it that way. Would be another way if you can give me some hints.
Okay, good. That's it for now.
Thank you. So I think we're going to spend a little time. You did a great introduction about darkness. That is something that I had wanted to talk about. I have always, at least since my middle years, been really interested in how how the patterns, what we call implicit patterns inside, these automatic kind of patterns that we develop, then influence how we treat others in the outside world, and that's where it is rooted, and it isn't so much how we think about things as it is the implicit patterns that we have inside that move us forward. And like we were saying earlier, if enough people are doing similar things, we call it culture. So then the overriding question for me is, this whole time that we've been doing this, Vanessa, the overriding question has been, is how on earth have we moved so far away from our basic humanity, which is to be kin, which is to be in caring relationships with each other? How have we done that? And so I was having a conversation, this old white woman with a long-standing brown friend one day, and she was talking about how she was the darkest child in the family. And so she was called Negrita, this little dark girl, and that her mother used to be scared if they went to Disneyland that a black family might take her home or something because she was so dark. And then she was sharing about how that darkness was not something she could abide with very easily, nor was the culture supportive of it in any way. And so she began to move out of poverty in the barrio and all of that, and moving through education and to become as white as possible, to become part of this other thing. And so now, though, especially with this current round of unrest, she was feeling more and more in contact with this little negrita inside. And I think she just said maybe we could bring her into the light. And I heard myself say, what if we could be with the little dark girl and not ask her to come into the light? What would it be like to value her right where she is, in all of her differences, in all of her darkness, and that she'd not be required to move an inch? And I don't really know why I said that, but I think it had something to do with beginning to have this sense and to wonder how we humans feel about darkness in general. We often struggle with darkness. I love that you were saying, you're comfortable in the dark, in that liminal, unknown space. But weird brains mainly aren't, because we want to be in the light with certainty, moving forward, understanding everything, making things be settled. And so we often, I think, and it's not, I don't think just white people necessarily, I think it's people in this weird culture to some degree or another struggle with this. I know at night we often feel sicker when we're ill in the dark. Somehow when we're little, the monsters are under the bed or in the closet. There's a way that this kind of darkness, some people even, we're getting longer darkness right now. And I know some people get really unhappy about the onset of winter, when our days are going to be short and our nights are going to be really, really dark. So there's something about darkness that does convey the unknown and the uncertain and the mysterious and the uncontrollable and the earthy and all of this. And so I thought it might be helpful if we could all pause together for just a little bit and see how our bodies feel about the dark, of entering the dark, to just pause. And it could be anything. I don't know what will come up. But if you can just kind of get your body in a comfortable position, and we'll just pause for a moment and sense darkness and sense what happens in our bodies, maybe around the heart and around the belly and in the muscles, in our jaws, wherever it might come up, and just sit with darkness for a bit and see what happens. And then just taking a little deeper breath and kind of breathing back outward into the outside world again, and taking a moment just to notice. So I'm curious, Vanessa, what did you notice?
The first thing I noticed was just that, like, closing my eyes and being in the dark, I just felt really grounded. That was my first feeling, was kind of grounded. Then I sensed for sensations and noticed that there was a little bit of like a tightness right around my belly area. So I kind of asked, what is that? And then some ideas came to me about the story you had told about the girl in the darkness. And just, as a dark-skinned Black woman, just that, how grateful I was to my mother's framework around darkness and Blackness was very different than what I have heard the stories from other dark-skinned Black women, that there's that tension, that there's something wrong with being dark. And so there was just that, that resistance to that story was what rose for me. Because of my story is that there's texture and beauty and depth to darkness, and that there's light there too. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, one doesn't eliminate the other. Yeah, I noticed I love winter and I like the dark of the night because it's quiet and that seems to suit my nature. But I also could feel, and the experience that came to me was really more around water and how scared I've always been to swim in spaces where fish could touch me or something, like there's some unknown that could get me in the dark, which I think is a residual of my trauma history of that, and also that most of the bad things happened and were initiated at night often, and so there's a tinge of that in it, of the unknown and all of that. So I think in me too there's a combination of both an appreciation for the quiet and the open liminal space of darkness, but my own history really does that. I have a much better relationship with dark now, though, than I used to have. And I believe that's because of something that we humans tend to do, which is, and again, we do this more if we're in that weird framework than if we are not, if we're in a more kinship-based framework. But I think many people do it nonetheless. And that is when we have something coming up inside of us from our trauma history, or we have something that we don't like very much that's happened by way of an emotion, like often the word on the street is there's positive emotions and there's negative emotions. And we want the negative emotions to go away. We don't want to be jealous. We don't want to feel shame. We don't want to sometimes even feel grief and all of that. So we do this gesture, make it go away so that we can be in these light, positive emotions, happy and comfortable and all of that kind of thing. Or so many of our traumas stay down in the dark inside of us because adaptively our brains separate out those traumas and hold them down there so that they aren't on us all the time and make it impossible for us to function. So then we can develop a real fear of dark because all of these kinds of things are dwelling inside of us in the dark. And if we feel that darkness is a negative in that way, it's going to be really hard not to want to push away dark bodies on the outside, because what's in us, the separation between two things, then tends to become this on the outside. This is not new to colonial occupation. As early as 700 AD and probably before that in China, the white, lighter-skinned people were held in esteem, and the darker-skinned people were not held in esteem and were not considered as valuable human beings. So reading that was actually between my experience with my friend, and that was what really got me to thinking about this, about how we've done that separation in such a big way from early on, even before there was any kind of colonial input or anything like that. But then you layer all of the systemic pieces and all of the pieces of how you were stolen and brought here. And we have a really difficult time. But I've come to really think that if we don't do practices that let us change this tendency in us to do this, if we don't learn to do those practices, which to me is deep spiritual practice, if we don't begin to welcome what's in there, just like you were saying earlier about fear, you know, to be able to do that, that it's going to be very hard to sustain the systemic changes that need to be made. It's going to be really difficult to sustain them. So I wanted to do a practice, if we could. Again, just one more practice together in our bodies, and then you can see if this is helpful for you. So if you were going to, each of us, if we were going to push something away, what gesture would that be? So this is the gesture I feel. So let's do together whatever the gesture is that's pushing away for you. Just go ahead and physically do that gesture. And now sense what's happening in your body. What happens in your chest? What happens in your belly? What happens in your muscles? What happens around your eyes? What happens to your breath? All of those pieces, when you do this, what is that like? So now let's just relax that for a moment and take a couple of breaths. And then let's see if we can explore the gesture of welcome, of what would it be like, again, just as you were saying, Vanessa, to draw the fear closer, whatever it might be. What's that gesture? So for me, that gesture is this. Yeah, see, we have different gestures, but again, this opening to whatever it is. So now feel what it's like. What does that gesture bring in your heart area, in your belly, to the muscles, to the face, just throughout the whole body. So let's do it again. Push away and sense what happens. And then take a breath and see what happens with welcome, with a gesture of welcome. So how was that, Vanessa? What was your experience?
Practice. It's, with the pushing away, it can be like, I can feel both affirmed in pushing away and, and like, ooh, really stiff, like the jaw. And so as is my way, I have a dual experience with it. There's a time to set that, and then there's a time that it's not a good time to do that. So that's kind of what my body kept doing. And then with this felt really good. I was really ready to bring in. So I think I was really ready to open when you said that. I think I was like, I felt that as great relief.
Yeah, so that's great. So there's a distinct feeling, and I think you're just right. There are times when we need to set a boundary or whatever it might be, and that can feel very affirming. But if we have to stay in that stance most of the time to keep the things that are dark, whether inside or outside, away, it's a terrible strain on the body. And I always feel this too, and then I feel the sense of what comes to me is all the others that hold me as well. It isn't just me doing this, but having the strength of the others who care about me and give me that comforting space in which I can hold whatever it is much more easily that needs to come in. So to me, this is like a core spiritual practice that we can do, all of us, which will be wonderful for healing our traumatic experiences, which has its own beauty, just that personal healing. But that as more and more people might be willing to do this kind of experience and draw in and hold and let things be healed, that will become a foundation on which culture can also begin to shift. So I really...
Thank you, Bonnie. That's a great practice. I love that. I love that.
So I think I can't believe we're running out of time. This has gone so quick.
We had one more question that we wanted to ask about what have we learned from doing these. So just if we can kind of add that, I wanted to ask you that, what you've learned. Did you want to?
I've learned how much I love you. Not that I didn't know that before, but it's been such an experience of being together in a way that feels vulnerable, to have an audience that's different than it is when you and I just, hang out and talk.
Yes.
That the other piece is I have felt a deep sorrow about the broken kinship bonds of being a weird white woman, weird raised white woman. And particularly when you shared your beautiful stories last time, and they were just being called in from your ancestors, and I was sharing my stories, but I'd thought about them ahead of time. I didn't, it was a totally different experience. And so I feel also a grief about the kinship bonds and it didn't just happen because of the trauma in our family. It happens because of this individualized, weird white culture that so many of us don't get to feel that. So but I guess the other thing is too, I feel more and more like I get to be part of your tribe.
Part of my tribe.
And that will gets taken in a different way that begins to enrich that sense inside of me as what it's possible. Because to me, without those kinship bonds, we're missing an enormous amount of our human capacity and what we're made for and what we yearn for. So it's been wonderful to do this. How about you? What's happened for you during this?
I have learned how committed to this process of restoration of kinship this whole community is. Like, this has been so nourishing for me to have this community of people that are, have stuck with us for 3 webinars, have sent us questions and comments, and I can't even express the gratitude and how much I've learned from you all, from your questions and comments and curiosity. And I've just got some renewed faith. I think I really learned that, while I know we're not alone in this journey, I've really experienced not being alone in this journey from you, Bonnie, and Joe, and Tanner, and Laura, and just having this community hold us in such a good and nourishing way for us to have these really deep conversations that could have been very difficult, but instead I looked forward to them each and every time. And how packed my schedule is.
You don't have any room to breathe.
But when it was time to do this, the energy rose. The ancestors showed up and I couldn't wait. So I think I learned that I'm less alone than I may have thought I was. And so that was really cool. And I just learned that this is deep, and this is really deep work, and it has to be done from an embodied way. I think sometimes we want to do this work from our headspace because that's where we feel strongest and less vulnerable. But I've learned that I think we're going to have to do it from a body place in order to really get it done. And I know I felt that, but now I kind of know it a little deeper.
Yeah. Well, I certainly share too, the having everybody be with us here has been wonderful. And it's been, I don't know, it just touches me deeply, and the questions and the comments do, and it caused me to think differently, and really, I don't know, you've helped us grow, all of you. So thank you for your presence. So I think we have 2 poems we want to read, but I'm wondering, this is not fair to you at all, Joe. Is there one more question that maybe you could say to us that we could speak to? No pressure.
Hi, Joe.
Hi. I was just going to back.
I thank you so much for being here and being willing to do this for us. You've been great at filtering things and bringing them together in a really beautiful way. So,
oh, thank you. There's a couple of people asking for uh, the meaning again of the weird,
Yeah.
and what what your reference was. And I know when I tried to look up this book on Amazon the other day, there were several weird, very weird connections. And finding the one that you were specifically referencing was not at the top of the list. So you either now, or maybe you could say you'll send it out later so that people can have that.
I can say, yeah, it is the word weird, W-E-I-R-D, Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. And the author is Joseph Henrich, Henrich. And it was about it's called The Weirdest People in the World or something like that. And there's also, Bettina, or maybe, I don't know, Laura gets, but whoever, I will send a review of that book that you could read and see if it's of interest, that can go out with the links.
Okay. Okay. And then the other question that's right here is someone saying that asking Vanessa about your reference to a spiritual practice that incorporates your ancestors and spiritual companions, and whether those are part of what you feel accompanied by when you're in the dark spaces. And can you share what in your spiritual practice supports you being in dark spaces, if it's not that?
That's a really big question for the end, but
3 minutes.
but yes, absolutely. Those connections and building spiritual building spiritual strength is part of my practice, in the ability to go into what I mean by dark spaces is the unknown, right? To wade deeply into the unknown, and be willing to have the rigor to meet what I find there. And that rigor is never just me. It is my ancestors. It is my teachers, Bonnie. It is my community. It is now all of you will go with me in those unknown spaces. All the questions, all that I have carried through this will go with me in the unknown spaces. So that is the practice. And I've had many teachers, but I do want to call out Jan Ingalls Smith, who's my shamanic teacher, and she's part of the Light Song community. And Light Song, I think they've got a website now that folks could look at, and there's a lot of practitioners there and teachers who have many ways to enter, relationship to spirit.
Yeah, lovely. So maybe this poem was also a way that I'm going to read as another way to enter into spaces of spirit. This is from the Arizona Hopi Nation elders. It feels good to bring our indigenous brothers and sisters in at this juncture too. There is a river flowing very fast. It is so great and swift that there are those who will be afraid. They will try to hold on to the shore. They will feel they are being torn apart and will suffer greatly. Know that this river has its destination. The elders say we must let go of the shore, push off into the middle of the river, keep our eyes open and our heads above the water. And I say, see who is there with you and celebrate. At this time in history, we are to take nothing personally, least of all ourselves. For the moment that we do, our spiritual journey and growth come to a halt. The time of the lone wolf is over. Gather yourselves. Banish the word struggle from your attitude and vocabulary. All that we do now must be done in a sacred manner and in celebration. We are the ones we have been waiting for.
I love that. And I was going to share a poem from an activist woman. It's called A Radical Gratitude Spell by Adrienne Marie Brown. You are a miracle walking. I greet you with wonder. In a world which seeks to own your joy and your imagination, you have chosen to be free. Every day as a practice, I can never know the struggles you went through to get here, but I know you have swum upstream, and at times it has been lonely. I want you to know I honor the choices you have made in solitude, and I honor the work you have done to belong. I honor your commitment to that which is larger than yourself, and I honor your journey to love the particular container of life that is you. You are enough. Your work is enough. You are needed. Your work is sacred. You are here, and I am grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. And thank you again to all the support we've had to be able to do this from Natural Lifemanship and Laura and Tanner and Bettina. Thank you.
Thank you. And Bonnie, did you want to mention the day for our?
It's on October 25th, Sunday, and it's at 9 a.m. Pacific time.
Yes.
So we have to adjust accordingly. And it's on the website. It's on Natural Lifemanship website.
Great. Bye, everybody. Have a good day.